They know you're here. We have to move now before they get inside.
The fluorescent lights of Seoul General's ER hummed with a low-frequency buzz that usually grated on Dr. Park's nerves, but tonight, the adrenaline of the 3 a.m. shift acted as a natural silencer. She stood over a shattered leg from a motorcycle accident, her hands moving with a rhythmic, terrifying efficiency. Every movement was economy, every stitch was a tactical strike. A final notice notification vibrated against her hip. Her debt was a shark circling in dark water, but she didn't flinch. Then, the double doors didn't just open, they exploded. 10 men in charcoal grey suits flooded the bay, moving in a practiced V formation. In the center, 2 men carried a heavy-set figure drenched in blood. The air in the room shifted instantly from sterile to predatory. "Clear the room!" a voice barked. It was Lieutenant Jun, a man whose tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. Dr. Park didn't move. A bodyguard placed a massive hand on her shoulder to shove her aside. Before his fingers could even tighten, Park's hand went to his wrist. Not with the grip of a doctor, but with the pressure point precision of a ROK Special Forces medic. The guard gasped, his arm going numb as he stumbled back. "I'm the trauma lead," Park said, her voice a flat, icy line. "If he stays in the hallway, he's a corpse. If he comes in here, I might keep him breathing." June locked eyes with her, his gaze scanning her rumpled scrubs and the cold, unblinking focus of her eyes. He signaled his men to stand down. They heaved Chairman Kang onto the trauma bed. The boss was a mountain of a man, his chest heaving, a jagged gunshot wound weeping dark arterial blood onto the white sheets. As Park cut away his silk shirt, she felt the weight of 9 pistols aimed at the back of her head. She didn't care about the guns. She cared about the silence. She noticed a hospital security guard standing by the door. He wasn't looking at the patient. He was watching the hallway, his hand resting on a radio that was switched off. He blocked the head nurse from entering with the crash cart. "Security protocol," the guard muttered. It was the first lie of the night. Park realized then that the hospital was no longer a sanctuary. It was a kill box. She reached for the suction, her eyes meeting the unconscious chairman's. Even in a coma, he looked like a king. "Welcome to my office, Chairman," she whispered, her fingers grazing the scar on her own neck, a souvenir from a mission the world forgot. "Let's see who tries to kill you first." The ICU was a cathedral of glass and humming machines. Chairman Kang lay hooked to a ventilator, the rhythmic hiss-click of the machine the only sound in the private wing. Lieutenant Jun stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the Seoul skyline. Dr. Park entered, her footsteps silent. She was supposed to be checking the vitals, but her tactical brain was mapping the room. 2 exits, 1 blind spot behind the ventilator, and a heavy oxygen tank that could be used as a blunt force weapon. She approached the IV stand. Her eyes, trained to spot anomalies in high-stress environments, caught it immediately. A small clear vial sat on the medication tray. It was labeled as a standard sedative, but the viscosity was wrong. It moved too slowly when the cart bumped. It was a neurotoxin, a silent cardiac arrest cocktail. She looked up and saw June watching her through the glass. He wasn't hiding it. He was testing her. He wanted to see if the debt-ridden doctor was smart enough to notice and desperate enough to stay quiet. Park reached for the vial, her heart rate remaining a steady 60 beats per minute. She didn't call for help. She didn't scream. Instead, she leaned over the chairman as if checking his pupils. "They're impatient, aren't they?" she breathed into his ear. She felt a shadow move behind her. It was the security guard from the ER. He was standing too close, his breath smelling of cheap cigarettes and nervous sweat. He reached out to adjust the IV drip, his hands shaking slightly. Park stepped between them, her body language shifting into a subtle defensive stance. "I'll handle the meds, officer. Go get some coffee. You look like you're about to jump out of your skin." The guard hesitated, his eyes darting to June in the hallway. June gave a microscopic nod. The guard retreated, but as he left, he bumped into Park's desk, sending her clipboard clattering to the floor. When she bent to pick it up, she saw her private drawer had been forced open. Her military discharge papers, the ones she kept hidden under a false bottom, had been moved. They knew she wasn't just a doctor. The game had evolved. It wasn't just about the boss anymore. It was about her cover. She swapped the poisoned vial for a genuine sedative in one fluid sleight of hand motion, hiding the toxin in her scrub pocket. She wasn't saving the boss out of mercy. She was saving him because he was her only ticket to the inner circle. By the fourth hour, the ICU had become a pressure cooker. The air felt thick with the scent of antiseptic and impending violence. Chairman Kang's eyes fluttered open. They weren't the eyes of a dying man. They were dark, intelligent, and predatory. He looked at the ventilator tube in his throat with a calm disgust. Park moved in, her movements gentle but firm as she began the weaning process. "Don't fight the machine, Chairman. It's the only thing keeping the poison from reaching your brain," she said. His hand, thick and calloused, reached out and gripped her wrist. His strength was surprising. He didn't pull her. He held her as if grounding himself. He pointed weakly toward the door, where Jun was talking into a burner phone. Park leaned in, her ear inches from his mouth. "They think I'm blind," he rasped, his voice a dry desert wind. "But I see you, Doctor. You don't belong in this white coat. You walk like a woman who has cleared rooms with a rifle." Park didn't flinch. She adjusted his pillow, her face a mask of professional indifference. "I've cleared many things, Chairman. Right now, I'm clearing your lungs." Suddenly, a nurse she didn't recognize entered the room carrying a tray of fresh bandages. The nurse was clumsy, her eyes darting toward the IV line Park had just secured. As the nurse passed, she tripped, sending a pitcher of boiling water toward Park's face. Park didn't scream. She didn't even blink. Her military reflexes took over. In one blur of motion, she caught the pitcher by the handle mid-air and used her other hand to steady the nurse's arm, twisting it just enough to signal a warning. The water splashed harmlessly onto the tile. The nurse turned pale, her lower lip trembling. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Park. I just—" "Get out," Park said, her voice dropping an octave into a command tone that would have leveled a platoon. The nurse fled. Park looked back at the chairman. He was smiling. It was a terrifying, bloody-toothed grin. "You saved me again," he whispered. "Why? My money hasn't reached your account yet." "I don't care about your money, Kang," she lied, her mind flashing to the text message on her phone from her handler. "Confirm target vitals. Prepare for extraction. I just hate seeing a messy job. If you're going to die, it won't be on my shift." She felt the toxin vial in her pocket, the one she had intercepted. She realized then that she was the only thing standing between the most powerful man in Seoul and a cold slab in the morgue. and she wasn't sure yet which side of that line she wanted to be on. The hospital's sub-basement felt like a tomb, the air heavy with the smell of damp concrete and industrial cleaner. Dr. Park was making a supply run, a tactical excuse to map the service corridors. She knew Lieutenant Jun was watching the primary CCTV feeds, but she also knew the blind spots of a standard security grid. Her military mind was humming, calculating exit trajectories and identifying improvised weapons in every janitor's closet. As she turned a corner near the laundry chutes, a shadow detached itself from the wall. The hitman was dressed in an orderly's uniform, but his gait was too wide, his posture too rigid. He didn't carry a clipboard. He carried a garrote wire hidden in a bundle of linens. He didn't speak. He lunged. Most doctors would have frozen, but Park's nervous system was wired for the kill zone. She dropped her center of gravity, letting the wire whistle over her head. In one fluid motion, she drove the palm of her hand into the man's chin, snapping his head back, then followed with a brutal knee to his solar plexus. She didn't kill him. Not yet. She pinned him against the cold brick wall, her fingers digging into his carotid artery with surgical precision. "Who sent you?" she hissed. "June? Or someone higher?" The man gasped, his eyes bulging as he realized he wasn't fighting a surgeon. He was fighting a ghost. Before he could answer, the heavy fire door at the end of the hall creaked. Park released him and stepped back into the shadows, just as a security camera overhead swiveled toward them. The hitman scrambled away, disappearing into the darkness. Park stood alone, her breathing perfectly regulated. She looked up at the camera lens. Far above, in the security suite, she knew Jun was rewinding the footage. She had shown too much. Her footwork, the way she had pivoted, it was a signature of the ROK elite units. She reached down and picked up a dropped vial of saline, her face returning to its mask of exhaustion. She had passed the test, but in doing so, she had painted a target on her own back. The predator was no longer just the mafia, it was her. Back in the luxury suite of the ICU, the atmosphere had shifted from clinical to transactional. Chairman Kang was sitting up, his skin a pale waxy yellow, but his eyes were sharp. He watched as Park checked his surgical drains. On the bedside table, her phone vibrated. A new message. Interest has doubled. 24 hours left. Kang's eyes drifted to the screen. He knew that look. The look of a person being hunted by numbers. "How much is it?" Kang asked, his voice stronger now, vibrating with the authority of a man who owned half the skyline. Park didn't look up. "It's nothing I can't handle, Chairman." Kang laughed, a dry, hacking sound that ended in a wince of pain. "Don't lie to a man who invented the lie. You're drowning. I can smell the salt water on you. My organization thrives on people like you, good people with one bad mistake." He reached for a leather folder his men had brought in. He slid a document across the tray. It wasn't a bill. It was a transfer of funds. 500 million won. Enough to wipe her slate clean and buy her a new life. "Why?" Park asked, her voice trembling, half from the shock of the amount, half from the realization that this was the hook her handlers wanted her to take. Kang looked out at the city lights. "Because you're the first person in 10 years who hasn't looked at me and seen a paycheck or a grave. You saw a patient. That kind of loyalty is a rare currency." Park stared at the check. Her phone vibrated again in her pocket, a rhythmic pulse. It was her handler checking in. The irony was a bitter pill. The man she was sent to destroy was the only one offering to save her. She felt the weight of the neurotoxin vial still hidden in her scrub pocket. She was trapped between two debts, one to the monsters who owned her past, and one to the monster who wanted to buy her future. She looked at Kang, seeing the paternal warmth in his eyes, and felt a cold, jagged shard of guilt pierce her heart. She wasn't a healer. She was a knife in a white coat. The emergency sirens began to wail at midnight, not for a patient, but for a system failure. The hospital's main power grid flickered and died, leaving the corridors bathed in the eerie, pulsating red of the backup generators. Dr. Park knew this wasn't an accident. This was the isolation phase. She sprinted toward the pharmacy cleanroom, the one place that had its own filtered air and the heavy reinforced door. She needed to synthesize the antidote for the neurotoxin June was still trying to slip into the boss's line. Inside the lab, the blue-tinted emergency lights gave the glass beakers a spectral glow. Park worked with frantic, high-speed precision, her military training allowing her to calculate chemical ratios in her head. She was a blur of motion, mixing compounds while her ears tracked the sounds in the hallway. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy boots. Not the soft-soled shoes of nurses. These were combat boots. The pharmacy door's electronic lock hissed and clicked. Someone was overriding it from the security hub. Park didn't panic. She grabbed a heavy glass carboy of sulfuric acid and moved to the side of the door. The lights in the lab went out completely. Total darkness. She heard the soft shh of a suppressed pistol being drawn. A man entered, his silhouette framed by the red light of the hallway. "Doctor," a voice whispered. It was the security guard from the ER, the one who had rifled through her desk. "June doesn't want any witnesses. It's nothing personal." He raised the weapon. Park didn't wait. She shattered the glass carboy at his feet, the acid hissing as it ate into the floor tiles and his boots. As he screamed and stumbled, she moved like a shadow, striking him twice in the throat before disarming him. She stood over his writhing body, the antidote vial held tightly in her hand. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was at war. She checked the guard's radio. It was tuned to a private frequency. "The doctor is dealt with," a voice crackled over the air. Park picked up the radio and pressed the talk button, her voice a cold, terrifying whisper. "Not even close." The red emergency lights pulsed like a failing heart as Dr. Park sprinted back to the ICU. She found the suite in a state of controlled carnage. The monitors were screaming, a flat, continuous tone that signaled the chairman's heart had stopped. Lieutenant June was already there, his hands on Kang's chest, performing compressions with a violent, performative desperation. But Park saw it instantly. He wasn't trying to restart the heart. He was using his weight to crush the sternum, ensuring the cardiac arrest was fatal. "Get back!" Park roared, throwing the weight of her shoulder into June to knock him off the bed. The bodyguards hesitated, their hands hovering over their holsters, but the sight of Park's blood-stained scrubs and the wild, focused fire in her eyes froze them. She didn't use the defibrillator yet. She grabbed a long-bore needle and drove it directly into Kang's heart, a tactical adrenaline bypass. June watched, his face a mask of simmering rage. "He's gone, Doctor," June hissed. "Stop mutilating the chairman's body." "I decide when he's gone," Park retorted, her eyes locked on the EKG. She began compressions, her movements a masterclass in rote military medicine. Brutal, efficient, and relentless. With every downward thrust, she felt the boss's ribs flex. She leaned in close, her sweat dripping onto his pale forehead. "Don't you dare die," she whispered, a command meant only for him. You haven't paid me yet. Suddenly, the flat line broke. A single jagged spike appeared on the monitor, followed by another. The rhythm was weak, but it was there. The room went silent. June's knuckles turned white as he gripped the bed rail. Park looked up at him, the antidote vial she had synthesized in the pharmacy held between her fingers like a trophy. She didn't say a word, but the message was clear. I know what you are. Kang's hand suddenly twitched, his fingers brushing against Park's. In that moment, a silent pact was sealed in the red light. She had saved his life against his own empire, and now they were both marked for death. The ICU floor was now a literal island. June had initiated a biohazard lockdown, sealing the glass partitions and cutting the external phone lines. They were trapped in a transparent box, surrounded by men who were waiting for the order to fire. Dr. Park sat on a rolling stool by Kang's bed, cleaning the glass shards from her knuckles. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hiss-sigh of the ventilator. She began a sweep of the room, her tactical training overriding her medical fatigue. She checked the underside of the bed, the vents, and finally, the boss's oxygen mask. There, tucked into the silicon seal, was a microscopic bug, a high-gain transmitter. June wasn't just waiting for Kang to die, he was listening for a confession or a location of the syndicate's hidden assets. Park held the bug up to the light, then slowly crushed it between two glass slides. She turned to find Kang watching her. He was awake, his eyes clear and terrifyingly sharp. He gestured for her to remove the tape from his mouth. You're trapped in here with me, Doctor, he rasped, his voice a ghost of its former power. They won't let you walk out alive now. You've seen the lieutenant's face when he fails. It's a face that requires a sacrifice. Park sat back down, her posture rigid. I've been trapped in worse places than a hospital, Chairman. She looked at the glass walls, where the silhouettes of the bodyguards moved like sharks. She realized the irony of her mission. She was sent here to dismantle this man's world, but now she was the only one keeping his heart beating. She felt a strange, cold clarity. To finish her job, she had to let him live long enough to kill everyone else. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small encrypted transmitter of her own, the one for her handler. She looked at it, then at the dying man who trusted her, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her own deception. As the dawn began to grey the windows of the ICU, the tension reached a breaking point. Kang beckoned Park closer. He knew the end of the lockdown was coming, and with it, the final move. I have a daughter, he whispered, his hand trembling as he reached for Park's. She is in Switzerland. She knows nothing of the blood on these hands. June will go after her next. He looked at Park with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. I want you to go to her. I have a trust set up. It's not just the 500 million won. It's a life. A real life. Park felt a lump form in her throat that no medical training could suppress. He was offering her a family, a legacy, and a way out of the darkness that had consumed her since the military. He looked at her not as a doctor, but as a daughter. Why me? She asked, her voice cracking. I'm a stranger. I'm a debt collector with a scalpel. Kang smiled, a sad, knowing expression. Because you have the same sadness in your eyes that I see in the mirror. You're a soldier who forgot what she was fighting for. I'm giving you a reason to remember. The moment was shattered by the sound of the glass partition sliding open. Lieutenant June entered, flanked by 4 men with drawn weapons. The lockdown was over because the wait was over. June looked at the monitor, then at Park. The chairman is stable enough to be moved to a private facility, Doctor. Your services are no longer required. We'll take the check back now. Park stood up, moving in front of Kang's bed. Her hand hovered near the heavy medical tray. The emotional warmth of the previous moment was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal focus. She looked at Kang one last time, seeing the flicker of hope in his eyes, and she knew what she had to do. She wasn't just a doctor, and she wasn't just an assassin. She was the one who decided who lived and who died. "He's not going anywhere with you," Park said, her voice echoing in the sterile room like a gunshot. The betrayal was complete, but the war had just begun. The hospital's freight elevator groaned as it descended toward the basement, the interior lights flickering over a scene of cold, clinical violence. Inside the cramped metal box, Doctor.
Park stood over Chairman Kang's gurney, a stolen submachine gun slung over her shoulder and a scalpel held in a reverse grip. The elevator doors slid open to the morgue level, a labyrinth of white tiles and stainless steel lockers. The air was frigid, the scent of formaldehyde thick enough to choke. "They're coming," Kang rasped, his hand clutching the edge of the gurney. He was gray, his body failing, but his spirit was a caged wolf. Park didn't answer. She kicked a heavy metal prep table into the center of the hallway to create a choke point. Seconds later, the stairwell door kicked open. 3 of June's elite hitters entered, moving with tactical discipline. They didn't see a doctor. They saw a problem to be liquidated. Park moved like a blur. She used the gurney as a mobile shield, shoving it toward the first shooter to disrupt his line of fire. As he stumbled, she closed the distance in 3 explosive strides. She drove the scalpel into the gap between his tactical vest and his throat, then spun him around to use as a human shield against the other 2. The hallway erupted in the deafening roar of gunfire, the bullets thudding into the dead weight of the guard. Park returned fire with the submachine gun, her aim cold and robotic. She didn't spray. She tapped the trigger in 2 round bursts, dropping both men with headshots that painted the white tiles red. She stood in the silence, the brass casings still bouncing on the floor, her breathing as steady as a monk's. She looked at Kang, who was staring at her with a mix of horror and profound respect. He knew then, his healer was a goddess of death. They reached the ambulance bay as the sun began to bleed over the Seoul skyline. The backup power had returned, but the hospital was a ghost ship. Lieutenant June was waiting by the exit, leaning against a black sedan, his face twisted in a sneer of desperate rage. He was the only one left. He held a detonator in his hand, a fail-safe to blow the hospital's oxygen farm and bury everyone inside. "You should have taken the money and ran, Park," June spat. "You're a ghost. You don't exist. Why die for a man who would have killed you yesterday if it saved him $1? Park stepped out of the shadows, her scrubs soaked in a cocktail of blood and antiseptic. She didn't look at the detonator. She looked at June's eyes, identifying the exact moment his courage would break. "I'm not dying for him," she said, her voice a low, terrifying hum. "I'm doing my job." Before June could thumb the button, Park threw the scalpel. It wasn't a wild toss. It was a calibrated strike that buried the blade deep into June's forearm. As he screamed and dropped the device, she was on him. The fight was short and one-sided. She broke his primary arm, then his knee, leaving him crumpled on the asphalt. She didn't kill him. She left him for the police sirens wailing in the distance. She turned back to the ambulance where Kang was struggling to breathe. She climbed into the back, grabbed the defibrillator paddles, and charged them. "Live, Chairman," she commanded, slamming the paddles onto his chest. "Live so you can see what happens next." The shock jolted his body, and his heart found its rhythm. A strong, steady beat that signaled his survival. He reached out, clutching her hand. "You saved me. Truly," he whispered. "The debt is gone. You are mine now." 3 days later, the hospital siege was the lead story on every news cycle, scrubbed of its mafia details and presented as a tragic gas leak. Dr. Park sat in the back of a pristine black limousine, her hands finally clean. Chairman Kang sat across from her, his chest heavily bandaged but his power fully restored. He handed her a leather-bound folder. Inside was the deed to a private villa in Jeju and a bank statement showing a balance that would allow her to buy the hospital she had just saved. "You are my shadow now, Park," Kang said, his voice full of a paternal warmth that would have moved a normal woman to tears. "My personal guardian. You saved the empire. Tomorrow, we begin the purge of everyone who stood with June." He looked at her with genuine love, a man who believed he had finally found something pure in a world of filth. Park looked at the villa's photos, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. "Thank you, Chairman," she said softly. The car pulled up to her apartment. She stepped out, watching the limousine disappear into the city traffic. She walked up the stairs, entered her dark studio, and sat at her desk. She didn't look at the deed or the money. She reached under her floorboard and pulled out a burner phone. She typed a single message. "Target is completely vulnerable. He has granted full access to the inner circle. The father trust is established. Phase 2, total dismantlement, begins tonight." She looked at the photo of her and her real unit on the wall, her eyes turning into shards of ice. She wasn't his daughter. She wasn't his savior. She was the slow-acting poison he had finally invited into his heart. The screen faded to black as she let out a single, cold breath. The miracle hand now reaching for a silencer.